Welcome back to Decouple. Today I'm joined by returning guest Emmet Penney. Emmet is a Decouple veteran. You can check out his previous episodes, number 19, The Nuclear New Deal, which remains one of our top 10 most downloaded, as well as episode 45, Can the Left and Right Come Together to Decouple, which he was a co-guest with our beloved Australian brother, James Flier. Emmet's been pretty busy since our last conversation, which lamentably was far too long ago, working on his excellent Exhaust podcast, which you should all check out and subscribe to. And most recently, his new endeavor, Nuclear Barbarians, which we're here to discuss today. And Emmet will give you lots of information about how to follow, how to get on the Substack, where to find the podcast, etc. Emmet, it's been way too long. You're honestly one of my favorite thinkers in this movement.
Thank you.
And you got great stories, man. Like I think I've said before, I'm not sure if you already are a speechwriter, but you have a way with words and stories. I remember we were struggling over FDR's commandeering of Al Capone's car. And we were both like, who was it again? Anyway, some golden moments.
One thing, everybody got upset about that. And then my friend Josh was like, it did make me pay attention very closely to everything you guys were saying because I kept screaming Al Capone. So
Love it. Anyway, so yeah, definitely listeners, if you haven't already, check out the archives for everything Emmet Penney's been on this podcast. Emmet, enough of the love here. Welcome back. It's really a pleasure having you, man.
Yeah, happy to be here, man.
All right, so let's dive in. My one of my best friends, he has a great sort of catchphrase. He's very socially facile. He says, "Hey, man, what's stealing your time?" So give us a sense of that right now.
Oh God. Well, a lot of it's been the projects I've been working on. Getting Nuclear Barbarians off the ground was more challenging than getting Exhaust off the ground, right? Because Exhaust, I had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't know if it was going to work, and it didn't have this advocacy edge to it, so the stakes felt pretty low. And Nuclear Barbarians, because I also wanted to create a business in case I wanted to sell some merch or something later, or do some other type of work, maybe consulting. I had to get the business registered, et cetera, et cetera. And I also had to figure out what it was going to be and what I wanted to say about it. It was I had this image in my head. I had this very weird vision that's still sort of coming together. But I managed to pull it out in the last second. I wanted to launch in early October, and here we are. So
nice. I mean, in a nutshell, what is it? I've seen your aesthetic on Twitter. You got a lot of Conan the Barbarian memes going on, some Dukem Nukem stuff. Is this the ultimate nuke bro place to be, or is there more subtlety to it? Give me an idea of what it is.
I mean, I think there will be more subtlety
elevator
to
pitch.
It. Yeah,
I knew. Yeah.
Yeah. So the elevator pitch of this is that nuclear advocacy, I think, is captured by an environmental movement that hates it. I want to advocate for nuclear for reasons beyond environmentalism to an audience that might not be interested in energy, nuclear, or environmentalism at all. But I think they should be, and I think they could be. And part of that is bringing together basically aesthetics that I love, like stuff from John Milius films, like Conan the Barbarian. Things obviously you're looking at a green screen, but I'll have Dylan put in my background done by the comic book artist Sterling Bartlett, a friend of mine. And I wanted somebody to combine Iron Maiden's Power Slave album cover with sort of the color template and theme of the Palo Verde plant in Arizona. And I was to me, nuclear is this super cool, super Promethean, really beefy thing that is totally maligned by the cathedral, right? Sort of the academic institutions, the NGOs, even the government institutions that oversee it. And I thought, well, we need to be barbarians to defend nuclear from civilization.
And storm the palace in some way.
Storm the palace. Yeah, exactly. It needs to be insurgent. And I'm figuring out how to do that. But that's one of the exciting things about it. I was like, I know what I want. I'm not sure how I'm going to get there, but I'm going to go for it anyway and see what shakes out, because I think that that's when the interesting stuff has really happened in my life, and I've been surprised by what's happened. Because one of the
Right.
things that I learned at Exhaust was that you could peel people into like caring about energy and energy politics and all of that who had never even considered it before,
Right.
right? Like we successfully nuke pilled like tons of our listenership, probably all, you know. And I was like, and we have an eclectic listenership there. We have everybody from like free market libertarians to basically like really like authentically right wing people, you know. We have communists that listen to our show, you know. So it told me that there was, and I mean, I've had guests on from all of those groups, you know.
Hmm.
Um, as well as some other ones. And it told me that there was a consensus possible here. But one of the things that I also had to engage with is that there are a lot of like nuclear or pro-nuclear aesthetics out there. Um, you know, like I couldn't be Isabel Bemeke. Like
Come on.
I mean, look at me. I look like
No
a
bodysuit.
potato. Yeah,
No digital disco bodysuit for Emmett.
Yeah, I would describe my physique as cake and steak. Like I couldn't do that for all sorts of reasons, and I shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
she's already doing it, and God bless her
Right.
for it. I couldn't do decouple. That's what you're doing. I can't be Michael Schellenberger. I can't be Breakthrough. I can't be all of these other things. I was like, what's
Right.
missing? And I was like, well, like, how do I be, how do I be like the black flag of nuclear energy
Right.
advocacy? How do I bring like what I value and how I think about things into it rather than trying to shoehorn myself
Right.
into a safer aesthetic?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is really, really important because I think, Izzy and I have joked about this. There's kind of more drama within the nuclear advocacy community than there is within the fashion industry.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I think, a bit of a shocking revelation for her as she kind of jumped into science communication, especially in nuclear. And there's just such a environment of kind of language policing. Like I remember when Maddie started the Green Nuclear Deal, she was catching a lot of shit from folks at the Green Energy Collective, for instance, just kind of sniping at her a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to get into gossiping and stuff here, but like, there's a lot of like, no, you need to be this way. You need to take on this aesthetic, don't be a bro, etc. And it's just, it's this attempt to sort of like confine us into all talking to the same audience. Or doing what's kind of like safe for nuclear advocacy, or like don't make me look bad because I'm trying to preach to the Democratic Socialists of America or get on well with the Sunrise Movement, so you're embarrassing me kind of thing. And it's like, fuck it, no, like we need to expand our Overton window. We need to talk to a lot of different audiences.
Yeah.
So that's been a real kind of revelation, and why I'm excited to have you on and see what you're doing develop, because it's got to be a big rainbow coalition, and we need the
Yeah, like I
the
don't
barbarians
like,
on one side.
look, if we're trying to build nuclear, I'm willing to work with pretty much anybody, and I hope they're willing to work with me and that they have serious commitments about having this broad coalition. I'd like to be able to take them at their word at that. I'm willing to take them at their word. They have an audience I can't get. That's great. Awesome.
Yeah,
We need that,
totally.
I just think it's really funny to reply to the NRDC with a meme of Duke Nukem saying "Hail to the King, baby," with a nuclear waist belt buckle, and you're basically staring up at his crotch. I think that rules. I want more of that because there's no reason to respect those people. There's no reason to try to argue on their terms to me. And basically, I think we need some like dark horses out there getting scrappy with them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we're going to get into this a bit later, but within the anti-genetic engineering, the anti-vax, the anti-nuclear communities, there's sort of celebrity scientists, celebrity figures, folks like Helen Caldicott, Vandana, Shiva, etc. Right, folks with very shaky credentials who suit the biases of the movements that they are become the celebrity stars of. They get flown around the world first class to speak at endless conferences and get endless honorary doctorates from institutions. Anyway, those people really need a reckoning. In the past, I've said that I truly will say that Helen Caldicott has blood on her hands for the kind of fear mongering she did post Fukushima, and we know that the danger from nuclear accidents is the panicked evacuations and the psychological distress. I have patients contacting me, extremely worried that they've had to have a few CT scans because of a cancer workup or something, and they're terrified they're going to get a different cancer on top of it. Like that has a real burden, and across the board. I mean, in terms of the overregulation of genetic engineering and the implications for golden rice, children losing their sight. I mean, these people really do have a lot of suffering on their hands, and so I'm glad to see them getting called out for it, and that there'll be another voice doing that. I wanted to pivot back though a little bit to who we're addressing, who we're talking to, because I think I maybe fell within a similar spell early on. As I was exploring nuclear, I was on sort of the Green Party of Canada, Facebook forum, getting into a lot of arguments, trying to win people over. It was a useful exercise in terms of being forced to address all of the concerns around nuclear, right?
Great way to
do a lot
sharpen
of
your
research.
blade.
Exactly, a whetstone. But ultimately you get to a point where it's no longer fruitful. And I was just realizing that these environmental groups and activists are a tiny percentage of the population. They're 1% to 2% of the demos here. They control a large amount of resources, and they have a long organizing experience, so they're able to amplify that voice. But there's a need for us to do that on the other side of the Overton spectrum, and I'm excited to see that happening. So who is your audience? Who are you trying to appeal to? Is there a demographic? Let's explore that a little bit more.
Yeah, generally, I mean, it's for anybody who likes it, obviously. But I understand that my aesthetic is really going to appeal to frustrated young men who feel like there's no future, and who are distrustful of the establishment and the society they've created.
Is there like a left-right thing? Or are you trying to sort of be pan-political? What's your...
No,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I have like nationalist commitment. I'm basically, okay, so here's the thing. I am probably just a New Deal Democrat, but that's basically like saying that you're a right-wing nationalist at this point on the left. Right. So that's probably my politics. That's fine to me. Other people might not like it. Other people can be wrong. That's allowed. But I think that because that's basically my politics, it affords me the opportunity to talk to both sides of the political spectrum. And I think especially after like COVID and stuff like that, there's a big reshuffling of what these ideological commitments really are, and what they really mean. Like what does right left mean when both parties in America were interested in crushing the labor movement, making our country weak by offshoring everything, hollowing out our manufacturing base, over-financializing everything, and creating a parasitic middle management class on every asset you can possibly think of, including college degrees.
Right.
What does that mean at that point, right? So, like, I'm talking to all comers, but specifically guys like that,
Okay, Emmett, so I got to follow up on this self-description of being a nationalist. I feel like that's a pretty kind of dirty word, a dangerous way to identify yourself, potentially. Help us understand what you mean by that, because I think you're someone who's welcoming of immigrants, who's tolerant and progressive in those regards. And I think can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, look, man, development projects are national. So is electricity. That's what we're talking about here. We want these big things that has to be done through the nation state. And I'm not like anti-immigrant or something like that. I mean, I think I have a pretty typical restrictionist view of that, because a tight labor market is good. And if there is no premium on being an American citizen, then you're no longer running a country, you're running an economic zone. And treating everything in this country like it's just an economic zone is part of the problem, as we've seen with RTOs and how the grid gets run. Not everything is like that.
All right. Cool.
I mean, that's like if somebody's going to say like, is that like racist, or I have no racial animus within me. That's not what it's about, you know?
Mhm.
And the other thing is, if you can't have any civic national dignity, then what do you have? Partisan dignity? Well, what are you going to get
Mhm.
done with just that? Right. And the other thing is like, I just like really don't understand that talking point anymore, where it's just like, well, why wouldn't you just have like open borders or whatever? Like, who does that benefit? Right? The elites
Mhm.
who get to flush human capital in and out of the market whenever they want, right? Like, and it creates huge brain drain in the developing world, right?
Mhm.
And if you want to take a look at some extremely exploitative contracts, you can look at what H-1B visas are like in the US and how that whole dirty economy works, and how it also screws over American tech workers because you can always get cheap, basically slave labor imported in from some other country to start working in that industry, who are totally captured by insane contracts and have no way to advocate for themselves, right? Like, people like saying, "Oh, I just want all of that stuff because ultimately it makes them feel good and their friends will tell them that they're a good person just like that." That's what it's about. There's no like coherent policy thinking there.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. I think a lot of what you're talking about is probably playing within some of the waters that Michael Schellenberger and Ted Nordhaus ventured into with their essay, the Death of Environmentalism.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're saying that it's this is the time to no longer play nice. That this is, I mean, I don't want to put the words in your mouth, right? But I think I'm also feeling this way, that there is a complete moral and ethical bankruptcy, to this group. They do enjoy a decent level of social capital, social trust, for some reason. But I would say that's the case, certainly amongst large swaths of the middle class, the upper middle
Mm-hmm.
class, and I think that's really got to be challenged because of the, frankly, I mean, anti-environmental, even if you want to put it in that regard, policies of, for instance, shutting down nuclear plants and polluting the air with the fossil fuels that replace them, if we just want to be very narrow. But also, if you want to take them on issues of environmental justice, the closure of Indian Point leads to burning more fossil fuels in plants that are sited in Asma Alley or in racialized communities. It's becoming so clear now, the kind of hypocrisy that we're seeing. I think a lot of pro-nuclear advocates kind of dance around that and don't want to offend environmentalist sensibilities. It may be an unpopular thing to do at this current moment in time, but I think it's also really important to be morally consistent, and maybe lead the pack, do something that's unpopular for a while in order to shift the politics. So you have I think it's your first essay in your Substack, introducing
Mm-hmm.
nuclear barbarians, and you kind of go a little bit into the origins of the environmental movement. I'd be interested in sort of exploring your thinking on that. I guess kind of the incubation and birth history going back a few centuries, to what this movement is, so we can kind of situate that, and then we'll interrogate it a little bit more, moving forward into its current manifestations.
Yeah, so Tim Snyder had a really interesting response to that, where he thought that some of the things that I attribute to sort of the Victorian era, he located in the earlier French physiocrats. He might be right about that, and I might have a too Anglo-centric view. So I just want to give credit to Tim for,
Yeah.
if he listens to this, I have no idea. But I know that he's sort of in our sphere on Twitter. I wanted to give him a nod because I don't think I had time to do that on the website. So, um, okay. The central premise of my argument is that environmentalism is really a type of stalking horse for elite motion sickness. That with the progressive ideology came the nostalgia that elites feel, right? It makes them like, nostalgia isn't memory. It is this like weird story you tell yourself about how cute things were when we were all rustic or whatever.
Hmm.
That can be located in people like James Fenimore Cooper, famous American author of books like The Last of the Mohicans. I quote a critic who says that Cooper never loved his Indians more than when he was watching them disappear. And there's just sort of this fetishization of childhood, of people who are basically looked at as children because they don't at that time get to participate in political life. So indigenous people, um, Black Americans, and women, right?
Hmm.
It's no surprise that even in incredible works of Victorian literature like Jane Eyre, there is the common for the time moment of a purely innocent, good hearted child dying as a moral reproach of the society that surrounds them,
Hmm.
right? By the way,
And
I love that book.
is this a response to, I mean, my sort of simplistic understanding of this period is, you have the Industrial Revolution, the dark satanic mills, you have little children working as, coal sweeps and miners. I mean, it's like
Totally. There's some authentic things that people are responding to here, right? Like, it's
like the
not
early stages of industrialization are pretty uniformly quite dirty. Like the benefits of industrialization sort of seem to come 50 to 100 years later as
yeah.
rising material benefits percolate outwards and a middle class establishes itself and trade unions get established, wherever it's happening across the world. But that initial stage it can be a bit of a hellscape.
It's rough, but what's interesting in that is that there's also this sort of creation of childhood as this discrete realm of innocence to which people would like to return,
Hmm.
right? And I think that that's sort of like what the noble savage myth serves for these people as well. If only we could return to the childhood of the world that these people were living
Right.
in, as if they don't have their own political squabbles or aren't thoughtfully living out their lives in a meaningful way.
Right.
I think that this endures for a while. I think it is a part of basically middle or upper middle class thinking, and I think that we can see resonance of that in the '60s environmental movement, right?
Hmm.
Which is basically started by elites in America who don't want the Storm King electric pump to be built in New York, right? And these people aren't like left or right, I guess. I guess they're right to the extent that they're elite. I mean, there are plenty of different ways to think about that. If you check out that awesome essay by William Tucker that I hyperlinked to in the piece, called The Leisure Class and the Environmental Movement, one of the things that you find out is like one of the guys who was in the community stopping Storm King from being built because they didn't want to look at power lines, despite the fact that everyone in their town and county and state wanted it to be built. One of those dudes is like a West Point general, right? So we're not
Right.
talking about like hippies, though eventually hippies show up and are a part of that whole thing, right? I mean, just go to
Right.
Woodstock, New York, you know? And a lot of this comes from like Malthusian fears that also come out of industrialization, right? What are you going to do with quote unquote excess human life when you don't have the resources, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, it is a genteel, nostalgic vision of rustic life before industrialism, that has little to do with reality. And that blends with a sort of millenarianism that we see in the '60s movements. Some of the cultural movements that come out of the New Left, I would in fact say most of them are like basically deeply morally nihilistic,
Hmm.
or at least apocalyptic. Some of that has to do with the pressures of the Cold War, understandable fears that if nuclear weapons were dropped, there would be serious consequences. The Cuban Missile Crisis doesn't help that. When we look at the energy crises, that really freaks people out. So we're about to have another round of that this winter. But I think people also need to really pay attention to how demoralizing the '60s and '70s were for Americans to watch political leaders get assassinated, to go through energy crises, as I've said, the catastrophe of the Vietnam War, and the crisis of legitimation for the state, how the civil rights movement upended the American view of itself. Ultimately, I think for the better, obviously. But those are still major shocks to how we think of ourselves. And I think it creates, in the words of Carter, a great malaise.
Hmm.
And in steps in an environmental movement that wants to stop the malaise through degrowth. Sometimes this is a return to some sort of like degrowth virtue of consuming less, like, right? That's sort of like Jimmy Carter's take on it. Sometimes it's the Amory Lovins, more wonkish, like we don't need hard generation, we need soft generation through wind and solar. Sometimes it's the horrifically Malthusian view of Paul Ehrlich. Sometimes it is the empty-headed, things make me feel bad, and I'm famous enough to talk about it, Jane Fonda way. And sometimes it is the I am a rich kid unaccountable to anybody, and I read Marcuse in college, and now I'm going to blow things up once a week thing that comes out of the New Left, right? All these things sort of braid together, right? And a lot of the anti-war people matriculate into the environmental movement. And I think that's where a lot of the anti-nuclearism comes. And there's a deep fear of big establishment things, big utilities, like big government, all of that really comes out of this movement. And look, some of these things they're just not wrong about. I get why coming out of the Vietnam War, you would be really distrustful of industrial society, because industrial society in America is, as Eisenhower said, basically a military industrial complex, right? Like I'm an anti-interventionist, I should say, by the way. Like America is way too involved, often violently, in the affairs of other countries. But our industrial policy, how we were going to build things, our alternative to having a social democracy was to basically create a permanent jobs program through building out the military and like just vaporizing tons of poor people in Cambodia and Vietnam and elsewhere. Right. So just to give them their due, right? Like I don't just want to dunk on them and say that they had nothing thoughtful in mind or that they were evil people. That's rarely how that actually goes. But I do want to say it was very convenient to become a left movement the moment the left was breaking away from the working class, which was very patriotic and anti-communist, and was watching itself get crushed through the downfall of the labor movement, sometimes through its own corruption, but often through the offshoring revolution that basically made us dependent on China for basic goods.
Right. No, I mean, one other characteristic of, one other tenet or stream of that environmental expression was, I think the Sierra Club was one of the dominant anti-immigration groups as well. I mean, in terms of degrowth, a lot of it was, we don't want to grow the population. We don't want California to become crowded. We don't want these scenic places to be overrun with poor people. We don't want them to have energy in order to live lives or for there to be enough energy for these people to actually, come here and be supported. I do want to, I've been struggling with language a little bit because I think, I don't want to label people in a pejorative sense, but I think it's really important that we do understand and have some nuance in the language we use. I mean, they say Inuit people have hundreds of words to describe the snow. English people or people who speak English have hundreds of ways to describe various states of being high or intoxicated. But in terms of understanding environmentalism and being nuanced about it, I've started been referring to the tenets of environmentalism that I most oppose as being eco-romantic, because their primary concerns are not indeed environmental or social. But I think it is important. I mean, so another term I'm trying to come by in terms of the environmentalism that I perhaps respect is maybe the Clean Air and Water Act environmentalists, the ozone layer environmentalists that, were for innovation and novel refrigerant that basically solved our ozone layer problem. Pro-nuclear environmentalists like Ansel Adams. I'm going to read a couple quotes here, right? But who said that nuclear energy is the only practical alternative that we have to destroying the environment with oil and coal. Or the wonderful William Seary, which I was just sharing an article on Twitter that you liked. That's the kind of the history of Diablo Canyon and how the Sierra Club, blew up and Friends of the Earth formed. But, this amazing president of the Sierra Club from 1964 to 1966, a biophysicist who studied nuclear radiation at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, and created this kind of historic compromise to get Diablo Canyon built and preserve this scenic area, Nobimo Dunes, I think it's called. But, this one quote that I was just came across that I really loved was that, when the Sierra Club was kind of working through this schism within itself about what to do with Diablo Canyon, and an anti-nuclear activist within Sierra Club wanted to share some sort of pseudoscientific scaremongering about contamination from reactors, William Siri said, "You can never be persuaded that your anti-nuclear crusade is meaningless, but you should at least know that for every page of inaccurate and distorted material from non-experts, I can produce 1,000 pages by competent authorities that refute it or place it in an unprejudiced context." So there's something at the heart of environmentalism. There's all these flaws, as you mentioned, sort of the Malthusian, the anti-immigrant, etc. I'm not trying to say that Ansel and William Siri were of impeccable moral character. I mean,
let's give him some credit. James Lovelock, obviously, right?
Yes, absolutely, right. So
an exception.
Yeah. So I'm talking about what I was saying with you in the sort of pre-recording was this idea of like, I don't want to throw that baby out with the bathwater, but I feel like those that expression of environmentalism is kind of like the left. It's something happened in the 60s, and we don't really see those expressions anymore. Maybe the 70s when the Clean Air and Water Act were passed. I mean, those were good expressions of the. You know what? He was the environmental president, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. He also wanted to build out 1,000 nuclear reactors.
Indeed.
So Project Independence was pretty harebrained, but that part of it was cool. So, yeah, I mean, look, I say in the piece that I understand that there are different types of environmentalism. And because I'm on the left, I recognize this type of like almost scholasticism of like, who's communism, which Marxism,
right.
That type of thing. And I do think there are meaningful distinctions to be had there. I mean, obviously, I just assented to it. But I think we should take a look at like what the movement means right now and whether or not people feel like they can actually make an honest case to the Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, the NRDC, maybe even Sunrise Movement, all of these, the Rocky Mountain Institute, right? Like we could just keep going, just getting hundreds of millions of dollars from Bezos and other people. Do you think that this is a debate that you're having with them? Or do you think that they are engaged in elite-sponsored, motivated sophistry? I think I've seen enough evidence to decide that it's the latter. Now, there are people who have different perspectives within the environmental movement. They happen to be often pro-nuclear, eco-modernists, whatever. But I think, as I say in the piece, that those friends of mine would also have to concede that they are indeed in a minority and basically behind enemy lines.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, there are a lot of reasons that I like nuclear that have nothing to do with the environment. And they seem to speak to like people's everyday concerns in a way that climate change doesn't really feel that way, right? Like the energy transition is going to take a long time. You can keep scaring the shit out of people about climate change. And I believe in climate change, and I think problems will come. But should the focus be on scaring people about that and using that as an end run around debate? Or should it be about trying to appeal to people's basic dignity and needs? Like your kids should have clean air to breathe because they're human beings. And that should be the way that is. Or like you shouldn't have to have a college degree to be able to support an entire family on one income. Right? Nuclear provides that, right? You should have a wealthy community based around something that produces something for society, not a weird world of fictive capital shell games that collapse and destroy people's lives, right? Like these are all things that I could point to as why I like nuclear. And in fact, they are the things I think of first when I think of nuclear. Stuff like cheap electricity. If your electricity isn't cheap, you don't have a modern democracy. And you likely don't have a democracy at all.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Bryce has done an excellent job of profiling that around the world.
Absolutely. Just had a great interview with him.
I look forward to it. No, I mean, in terms of this kind of modern environmentalist, nihilist death cult that we sort of are exposed to and what youth are exposed to, I mean, you're going to have to forgive me, gentle listeners, because this is an idea that I'm sort of working with and we'll probably talk about on a few episodes. But I've been giving this a lot of thought recently, and I think there is a way to be climate concerned or even climate alarmed, but to channel that in a positive direction. Because what I see from the Fridays for Future marches that I attend, and the kind of global youth movement in that regard, it's very reminiscent of a sort of tune in, drop out sort of thing. They're striking from school, they're missing their classes. I've got no problem with that, but there's a real urgency to training up the next generation of problem solvers, right? In whatever domain that's within. But I'm pretty focused on STEM because I think we've got some problems that are very amenable to science, technology, and engineering. And I was talking with Ted Nordhaus just the other day about the kind of metaphors we use to understand the challenges of climate change. And we were reflecting on the fact that the Green Left, I had Seth Klein on a little while ago to talk about his book, The Good War, really hold up World War II as an example. And it was a time, of a lot of rationing. And you'll find that, Seth really, and subsequent conversations that I had with him, just fetishized rationing. Like, he was like, people in Canada loved rationing. We felt like we were contributing to a bigger mission. Like, it actually polled quite popularly. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And what Ted said that I thought was really interesting was, the better model may well be responses to the Cold War. And this is along the lines of what I've been thinking. Like, this is based on some pretty spotty historical knowledge, but there was a time with sort of Sputnik anxiety, losing the space race, that our response was sending a man to the moon was like unprecedented levels of investment in education in elementary and high schools, rocket clubs, that kind of thing. Like, that's what I would love. Like, the culture shift I would love to see is saying, you're concerned about climate, we got to fucking solve it. We need to innovate. Like, here's these amazing educational programs. Like, here's a national campaign, to bring this kind of knowledge and get you guys excited, because ultimately the cure to anxiety, which so many youth are struggling with right now, and climate anxiety, is empowerment, in a sense that you can do something about it, but you need the tools. So strike on Friday, study on Saturday. It's kind of like my memo, but I'm trying to, like, I think in a similar way, you're trying to shift culture, and that's kind of become my little obsession for the moment is how do we shift youth culture in that way? And, I want to make my humble contribution to that, my little raindrop in the flood.
Right. So obviously everybody here, like listeners are, I assume, I'm sure you have some hate listeners, is pro-nuclear, right? And we want some of these STEM people not just involved in nuclear, but other things. Okay. Important to think about. So some other questions that we would want to add to that is, where are they going to work?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Are the things we want built things that are built here?
Right.
Because if they're not, then there's no point in educating these people to do those things.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we should ask ourselves some really hard questions about our manufacturing capacity. Now, we should do that. Now, maybe we shouldn't do every single thing in North America, right? It's probably just not advantageous, right? Maybe the heavy forging should stay in France for reactors or what have you. Like, they're fine. They're an ally. Shit, we could stand to repair that relationship a little bit. Right? But that's sort of what I mean when I talk about, like, a vision of this beyond just climate, is that when we limit it to climate, we tend to think about culture and education, and not about, like, politics and manufacturing, right? In a very, like, hard-nosed way, where it's just like, where are those people going to work? Because I agree with you. I think that's awesome. I would love for there to be, like, this STEM push. I mean, Adrian and I, in our Nuclear New Deal piece, wrote about how we need that. So I am for that. But we also have to basically reshore some stuff, build up our manufacturing so they have a place to go, and come up with some state entities that are actually responsibly and accountably run that can deliver on that. On top of that, there has to be a cultural devaluation of white-collar work, which is overinflated right now, to the detriment of respecting working people all over America.
Yeah.
I think
absolutely.
It's, frankly, like, if I'm just going to be blunt, it's fucking disgusting. The amount of people with make work jobs that write for fucking Vox or whatever, and like to shit on people that have a hard scrabble life and try to get by day to day wherever they live in cities or flyover country. Like, I cannot stand it. These vacationers in intellectual life acting like they ought to run the world.
Well, and I think this is going to segue very nicely into chapter 4, wherever we are in this podcast. But the frank and stark conflict that we're seeing developing between environmentalism and labor. There's a wedge that's already there, and I really think that we need to be the hammer that continues to split that wedge between environmentalism and labor. I'm not sure how strongly linked they ever were, quite frankly. There's historical archive photos of environmentalists scrapping with tradespeople over the construction of Indian Point. And then, in Illinois, we see a similar struggle between labor and genteel environmentalists over the threatened closure of Byron and Dresden. What are your thoughts around that? How do we engage in that battle?
Yeah, we're going to see. I'm very interested to see what happens with the Save Diablo movement, because I think a lot of unions are going to get involved with that, and that's really exciting. I think it's a deal to be brokered, right? And I think that there's a lot to say there, at least for defending the nuclear fleet. How we would parlay that into expanding the nuclear fleet is a different question. So, I mean, I think you and Ted probably talked about this, that unions are in it for better working conditions and better pay for their workers, and that's what they should be. There isn't always a broader political vision. So getting that together is going to be an interesting thing to do. But right now in America, we have what's being called the Great Resignation, where over 4 million people have just basically Johnny paychecked out of their jobs. You can take this job and shove it.
Right.
And we have an incipient strike wave happening right now.
Right.
So maybe this is a return to the labor movement. I think what's important is that there really just aren't a lot of people from the left that are prime movers or involved in either of those two things, right? So that should tell us something about the current state of the left, right?
100%.
And I think, to me, this is all industry and manufacturing. When I look at what we need to do to solve climate change, it's all big industrial projects. So getting labor on board is political buy-in number one, right? Or at least within the top three, right? Because you need to go in with a coalition of people that can actually crack the whip on things and get things done.
Locally, within the Canadian context, the vision for our nuclear future it's the managerial class of the power plants, the utilities, the nuclear associations. Labor is essentially silenced. Labor in Canada, the labor unions are saying, no, we need to build more large CANDU reactors.
That's beautiful to hear.
If we're serious about decarbonization, a recent report from the Power Workers Union up here in Canada on, plans to electrify everything, electrify transport. We need to 3x our current generation, and we have the tools to do that in the form of these larger reactors. They're politically unpopular, but they're not going to become popular if there's no champion of them. And from what I've seen in my work in this sector, labor has been pretty downtrodden in this and been fairly voiceless in it. And in terms of my work with Canadians for Nuclear Energy, that's been just my absolute focus, is engaging with these unions, creating messaging that they're a little uncomfortable with now, but are currently starting to share, right? And so we have our struggle to save a local nuclear plant. That's the Pickering Nuclear Generating Station. And, labor is behind that. They're a little hedgy about coming out for it or spending any either bargaining capital or effort, because they view it as a lost cause. But there is by these outside ally voices coming through, you can see their resolve firming and again, just starting to see some of the pro Pickering tweets getting picked up and retweeted by some of the unions is very interesting, and it is sending some tremors into the managerial class of the nuclear establishment.
Yeah, I mean, one of the favorite things that happens is I'll publish something or I'll appear on a podcast, and someone from a union or from the trades or an electrical engineer will be like, "Thank you for writing that or saying that."
Yes, yeah.
And those are the people I want praise from, right? That's the praise I care about most. You don't just write or think for kudos, but it is important to know that the people who are in the field and know stuff respect what you are doing, and that you're representing the realities of their world as correctly as you possibly can to the world around you. So what you've said about what's going on with labor in Canada and nuclear is so exciting to me. And I love that, right? It sounds so silly, like when you start realizing how, right, it's simple, but it's hard. I loved when you
Mhm.
had Alex Trembath on. I respect Alex a lot, and I really liked that episode. Um, and he said, that's a hard, not an easy problem. Right.
Yeah.
And he would say that to things that were simple, right? Because the assumption is that if something's simple, it's going to be easy.
Right.
But like what we're talking about is actually like really hard. That's a hard, not an easy problem, to quote Alex about this. And it is, again, all industrial.
Mhm.
There is no non-industrial solution to climate change,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like if we're talking agriculture, if we're talking energy, if we're talking electricity, if we're talking infrastructural protections like dams or seawalls or whatever, it is all industry.
Right. I mean, and the eco-romantic, nostalgic return to Eden, it starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom, of simultaneous, global breadbasket failures. If we fail to innovate, if we stop technological progress in the face of larger and larger problems that require larger and larger and more ambitious solutions, then yeah, maybe these catastrophic predictions come true or come true sooner, or the death toll is higher. So this is where what the environmental movement has become and what it's fighting for becomes just profoundly not just anti-social but anti-environmental at the same time. In terms of labor, you talked before. I thought this was really brilliant on Robert Bryce's podcast about the patronage relationships between renewables of the Democrats, natural gas and the Republicans, and
Mm-hmm.
natural gas and renewables. I just thought that was an amazing way to think about it and why we're making some of the insane fatal trifecta grid choices that we are, not just
Yeah.
in the U.S. but around the world, and sort of seeking that patronage relationship, like in terms of the realpolitik of energy. Ultimately, more nuclear is not going to get built because there's a fringe of pro-nuclear advocates with their fists in the air, right? I mean, we're important. I think we're generating a new discourse.
Mm-hmm.
That's an essential piece of the puzzle. But ultimately, nuclear is going to get built because of the energy crisis in Europe, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
gas prices are up 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. It's not because we have like fucking great takes on Twitter, man. Like that's not gonna
Right.
be like we're not
Right.
that important. Thank God,
Yeah.
too. By the way, if I were that
Yeah.
important, I don't think I could handle it, and I don't think the world would be better off.
Right. But like a battleground in terms of that patronage, I think we're talking about labor as, I don't know if patronage is the right term, but forming relationships of allyship and strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
Labor really seems to be a key point there. And there is a battle for labor. And the environmentalists, are pitching a green transition and sort of pretending that there's going to be, a green industrial revolution, building, wind turbine, really not the nacelles because, Germany will be doing that, or, but that we could build the towers or something and roll some steel, or, like a lot of the aesthetic of the green left builds off of, again, World War II mass production of renewables,
Do
essentially,
that.
right?
Okay. So here, can
And
I just add, like, say something real quick about
yeah, yeah,
that?
yeah.
So Maddie Serwinski and I looked into the Biden Solar Futures Plan, which comes out from NREL and like these basically like government institutions, right?
National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Yeah.
Yep,
I know.
yep.
Okay.
And the study was spearheaded by a woman who worked for a solar startup that then got bought by the Saudis. But that aside, one of the things that they basically admit is like, yeah, China makes all of this anymore, and there's probably no way we're ever going to build solar domestically. Like
Right.
that just won't happen.
Right.
There's no reason to do that.
Yeah.
I was like, great.
And
Okay, build back better. Yeah, okay.
yeah, right. No, I mean, there was a great article as well shared by a Labour MP from Scotland, which was, just exposing the fact that, for their offshore wind build, there had been promise of jobs. They set up a facility, again, just for rolling out the towers, nothing complex.
Mhm.
And within a few years, it got offshored to Vietnam, and, the factory closed.
Yep.
These jobs are illusory. And then also, I mean, I love that parking lot metaphor that one of the union heads, Bob Walker, gave me around, how large is the parking lot outside of a solar facility or a wind facility?
Yeah.
Now, there are no parking lots. What about a gas facility? 30 parking spots for a massive gas plant, like a 600 megawatt gas plant. A CANDU reactor, a CANDU site, we've got a site with 2,000 parking spots in Pickering, right?
Yeah.
And 7,600 full-time equivalent jobs are on the line when that plant closes, 3,000 of them directly at the plant, right? And when our General Motors automotive plant shut down in Oshawa, there was political uproar. The premier was, throwing out plans to sort of keep the plant going, and it's just crickets in the face of Pickering closing. And I think, in Canada here, we have 76,000 people working within the nuclear supply chain, heavy union density. For me, this is such an opportunity, and we need to win that battle of ideas as pro-nuclear advocates, demonstrating that the just transition is already here. It's unionized, intergenerational jobs that nuclear provides. And that,
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I'm right there with you. Like, look, when I take a look at everything that's happening right now, I am actually filled with hope. It's going to be a dark winter, man. It's going to hit like Lebanon. It's already it's heartbreaking to see what's happening there.
Grid's down, right? Total blackout for days now, right?
India's probably going to be there soon too. And that's just crushing. To take a look at. And it's going to be a hard winter in Europe. And in America, I think people's heating bills are projected to go up something like 54% this year.
And like, what is the response to that, right? I mean, this is Roger Pilkey's iron law, right? Or I think Paris's quote, you cut down the last tree to heat your child, keep your child from freezing at night, right? The kind of Ted wrote about this as well, sort of the anti-nuclear chickens coming home to roost, or who else said this? This is your energy transition. Did you say that?
No, here it is. I think a bunch of people have been saying it. Yeah, I think I love the way Mark Nelson put it. He said people thought they were doing decarbonization, but then the truth was revealed that they were in fact doing degrowth, and that's what this looks like. So look, I mean, it's America, man. We love fracking. We love fracking. We love it so much. We're going to do so much more natural gas in a response to this because that's where our path dependency is. We have an opportunity to argue for nuclear. We'd have to really change some of the regulation and laws here, I think, to get this done. I'm becoming more and more convinced. But what's interesting is we seem to be willing to build out nuclear in other countries, but not in America. I don't know why our elites think Americans don't deserve that, but I guess that's what they believe. Because in Ukraine, we're going to build more AP-1000s, which is great, by the way. I love that we're doing that. I just wish we were doing some of that here. And it's one of those things where it's like the imperial center gets hollowed out to feed parts of its projects abroad,
Perfect, yeah. I mean, here's my concern, right? Is finally, we're at a moment, perhaps fracking was part of what killed the nuclear renaissance in the early 2000s. I'm sure, a large part of it was Fukushima didn't help the cause, and the incompetence of, Western nuclear builders and companies, maybe it was the nail in that coffin, right? We're on the verge with this energy crisis. I mean, nuclear does well when fossil fuels are in crisis. Renewables do well when fossil fuels are cheap and plentiful. I think that should give everybody pause. We're at a moment where we're in an energy crunch, and all of a sudden, in Britain they're talking about building more EPRs, building Rolls-Royce nuclear, etc. I think what I'm really concerned about is this is an incredible moment, and the nuclear industry is going to fuck it up. I think there's a very high chance of that, and so I wanted to bounce this off you. I think it's just common sense, that the industry should look at, the errors of Vogtle, of Sommer, of so many other places, and really focus not on a fancy new design or a new scale. I didn't mean that as a pun on the company, but, SMRs, for instance, and not like if I were running this whole thing, what I would say is who's doing it on budget and on time? What are they building? What just happened in UAE, for instance? Okay, like we need to assemble an international dream team. Like if we want to build in America on budget and on time, we need to be humble. We need to do what the Koreans did, which was they looked around, or what the French did, and they looked around and said, who's the best at building these things? What technology are they building? Who can we bring in as consultants to guide us through this? Who can we bring in as a crane operator to not fuck up, loading in the reactor vessel? Like that to me, that seems like what's really needed to seize the moment and take advantage of this opportunity, because I'm super concerned that we're going to fuck this up. I think
it depends on where you live, honestly.
I'm saying in the West, in the UK and France, Macron has come out again. We need to reinvent nuclear. It's exciting. He's actually saying it. He's coming out, but it's limited, I think, to building 6 SMRs and a reinvention, right? As if the old stuff didn't work. I mean, they're burned by Flamanville, right? That's like a EPR that's in its 14th year and 4 times over budget. Like there's reason for this, but to me, it's like, okay, we'll find the people. Like just the evidence, man. Like, just where did it work? What worked? Learn from that, not reinventing the wheel every 10 years, every time there's a cycle where fossil fuels get expensive and we have an opportunity again. That's my worry. Anyway, it's a bit of a diatribe, but and the unions, and I will say the unions see this, right? And that's why the Canadian unions are pro CANDO. Like, they're the people who are making sense. They are the people who are making sense both on the scale of decarbonization, electrification that's required, what reactors match that.
Yeah,
what
if it ain't broke, don't fix
jobs.
it. Like it's that simple. So the question is, like, again, that might depend on where you live and what your government's capable of doing. In the US, we're not in good shape. We basically don't have a nuclear industry. We have an energy industry that has nuclear assets. Mm-hmm. It's also very profitable to decommission a nuclear plant.
Right.
So a lot of these utilities, they don't even want to defend a plant that gets closed. That happens. It's sad, but it's the case. So that puts us in a really weird position, right? Because the other thing about, like, the Biden presidency is that they have a lot of nuclear hostile people, and they have a lot of people in there whose legacy project will be renewables build-outs. That is how they have envisioned their future. The DOE Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, is one such person, right? If you check out her book, co-authored with her husband, Dan Mulhern, in 2011, that is the latter half of that book. And it details how she built out the wind industry in Michigan, right? Because Michigan only sees itself in terms of what it lost or had with the automotive industry. And that's the vision for America. All of those businesses went belly up, by the way. None of them survived, probably for the reasons that the Scottish guy was talking about. Okay.
Right.
So that means we're in really, like, hostile territory for all of this. And we're going to have to start looking at who wants what, right? Like, there are the people we think we want or should work with us, and then there are the people who might actually work with us. That's one of the reasons why I talk to the right a lot, is because a lot of them are hungry for a manufacturing plan for America, stuff like this. I'm not saying they're the only people to talk to, by the way. I'm just going to walk through, like, a potential vision for what this might look like. It is clear that coal's days are numbered in America. I think we still burn some of the most coal in the world, but the plants are dying. Now, the left is going to say, once we pass the PRO Act, that's fine, because those unions can get destroyed, but we'll have an easier time organizing them on the back end when they all get renewables jobs.
Well, and those jobs will not have, what was it in Illinois again? They were mandating a kind of basement wage that would be required for these projects, and the environmentalists fought that on racial justice lines, I believe, right?
Yes. Oh, always. Yeah. That was prohibitive to POC business owners. Right. To say nothing of perhaps how that might hurt the POC working class, but we can get into that later. Anyway, where was I going with this? Right. So we want to take a look at coal country, right? Now, there are certain states in America where you're not allowed to build nuclear. We should probably change that, because if we, like, West Virginia is one of them.
Really?
Right?
They have a nuclear ban?
No, they don't have a nuclear plant. Yeah, they have a nuclear ban. Yeah. I thought you said plan. And I was like,
no.
I wish. And they're like 90% coal.
Is that probably, like, pushed by the coal industry?
Oh, I'm sure.
That ban?
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to have to figure out how to create some sort of desire there for that to happen, because one way would say the lesser of two evils to them. We could say, like, look, we'll build you some nuclear plants and you get to own them or whatever, and that'll expand your workforce and keep these jobs together so the community will like it. It keeps your reliability, right? And it's not going to add unreliability to your grid. Because if right now we did, like, the borderline psychopathic Biden admin plan for building out a ton of renewables, that would destroy all of those coal plants, which are built into their rate base, which means people are paying for them. And then it would add another layer of unreliability into their mix for all of the green energy, quote unquote green, all of the unreliables, wind and solar, they would have to build on top of that. So they'd be paying for plants that don't produce anymore, experiencing massive job loss, paying for new unreliable energy. And then, as everybody knows now, anybody who's paying attention knows this, that unreliable means unaffordable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to create a different type of vision there. And we have to work with those communities. And we have to work with people who might not even share some of our other values to get that done, right? I'm thinking state by state in America. Right? In brokering deals with big business and the federal government, because that is the only way I can really see this going forward at this point. That might be a pipe dream, by the way. I'm spitballing here just like you, but this is how I've been thinking of these things, right? Like we need to look at who stands to benefit the most. And by the way, where these like red states are that have all this coal or whatever, you'll have to fight with fossil fuels, but you won't have to fight fossil fuel and environmentalists, because environmentalists don't care about poor people that live and working class people that live in flyover country. They think they're subhuman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I gotta tell you a quick story, Emmett. And it's about the importance of energy. And in this circumstance, the importance of coal. Which is not a story I thought I'd be telling. But I took my son to a museum in what's called Steel Town, Hamilton. It's the big industrial town on Lake Ontario. And I kind of forgot, but my triple great-grandfather, my son's quadruple great-grandfather, was a pretty renowned engineer in Canada. And Hamilton suffered from a cholera outbreak in 1854, which killed 1 in 40 people. Probably more people got sick and almost died. So it's just an unimaginable death toll, right? And that led them to the understanding that they needed to come up with a safe water supply. And so my triple great grandfather ended up actually designing a pump house for them, coal-fired, that brought water from a clean part of the lake, pumped it up onto this escarpment to a reservoir, and solved the cholera problem. And they got that done in 2 years' time. Like imported high quality pipes from Scotland. I mean, this was a time when all of your gears and parts were carved out of wood, as a mold. You poured iron in. Like, just, it's insane thinking about the engineering and the manufacturing here. And it was just it was yet another lesson, that idea that you'll burn the last stick of wood to keep your child alive, right? And the sort of trade-offs of fossil fuels are of just plentiful energy, right? And the fact that, yes, Hamilton suffered a lot from air pollution, right? Burned a lot of coal for steel, burned some coal for clean water. But on balance, far more lives were saved by burning that coal and getting clean water in Hamilton than from the air pollution. It was interesting to think of. And then, reflecting on it now, the current pumps are powered by electricity, which is largely nuclear and hydro in Ontario. And so there's no trade-off anymore. You get your clean water, you get your clean air, right? Like,
we love it. We love it. I mean, look, like, Alex Epstein is right. Nature in the world is supremely dangerous. Fossil fuels made the world more safe. Fossil fuels have come with some consequences we don't like anymore. That's okay. I think it's like, what's that? Pro-nuclear Aussie, Ben Hurd? What's his name?
Yeah, or Oscar Archer maybe, or
no, it was Ben in Robert Bryce's documentary. Said you get most of the things you get out of hydrocarbons from nuclear without any of the side effects.
Yeah.
That's the vision. That's what we're offering. I mean, look, man, the deck is stacked against us, right? Like, this is going to take a long, long time. It is going to be a weird ass journey, and things outside of our control are going to determine how most of it goes. Right. So anybody who's pro-nuclear needs to be ready for that. And I think people should get really honest with themselves about what the energy transition is going to look like and how long it's really going to take. Yeah. Because these like 10-year time windows or whatever, it just destroys credibility. Right. Okay. Yeah. So here's something. I'm not going to get into a whole debate on like ivermectin and like COVID or whatever, but I don't know if you saw that Joe Rogan clip where he's talking with that CNN doctor, and he's like, your network lied about me taking horse dewormer. He was like, I was prescribed ivermectin, like by a doctor. I think Joe Rogan's also vaccinated. So he's like, and you guys, I said that on that episode, and you guys lied about it over and over again. And you can find like a supercut of everybody saying Joe Rogan takes like horse dewormer. This is why no one is getting vaccinated anymore. And he says to the guy, do you understand that when you do this and people know that you're lying, that's why they don't trust you on literally anything else you say, that they wonder what the hell is actually going on in Syria or Afghanistan or wherever else you're reporting on. Do you understand what this does to your credibility and why people listen to me more trustfully than they listen to you? Right?
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing there. And that is what the environmental movement is doing to itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that. I mean, take a look at COP, right? You're going to be out there harassing people in next month, which I'm excited to see clips of. And the nuclear industry can't show up to that. But for some reason, like fucking Leonardo DiCaprio can.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like this is all like top tier international elite stuff that will always be geared toward immiserating the lives of everyday people, because that is how people think of it once they get to that top level. They aren't going to come up with the solution where they're like, you know what? I think we should do a major national manufacturing build out and build all of these things, because they are predisposed not to think like that. It's not in their interest to do that immediately. They benefited from how all of this has panned out. And it's not a conspiracy, like Gore Vidal says, because they don't need to conspire. They just are who they are, and they all know each other, you know?
So how long till the bubble gets burst? Because, you know, the arguments are morally bankrupt. The hypocrisy is becoming more and more blatant. You know, it's important for folks like us to be pointing that out, you know, for example, the Indian Point closure. But, you know, they have, I think the global budget for environmental NGOs is in the billions, maybe not tens of billions, or maybe 8 billion. I know NRDC has an operating budget yearly of, was it 200 million? I mean, that's going to delay the, you know, the inevitable perception of these folks. What, like you're saying, the decay in their believability and their credibility. And I guess, you know, to close, Nuclear Barbarians is taking a swipe at those folks. And tell me, to just, I guess, in closing, give us, you know, how people can get involved, but also a little bit more about, you know, how you're planning on engaging with the environmental movement, these thought leaders, the celebrities, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I plan on being antagonistic. I mean, I think the environmental NGOs that are responsible for things like the closure of Indian Point, we need to come up with the legal grounds to forcibly disincorporate them. Whether that is infrastructural terrorism or not, I don't care. But breaking them is probably the only way that we succeed, right? Because the money's not going to start flowing some other way. So political means like that is probably more necessary than discursive means. But discursive means are helpful. And that's some of what I'm going to do. So, yeah, you can find it at nuclearbarbarians.substack.com. And I'm going to be writing some stuff as well as putting out a weekly podcast. So if you subscribe, you'll get it right to your inbox. And what I want to do is I want to create different ways of thinking about why we do what we do, why we develop, why it's important, why we have all this stuff that we need to take care of. What does taking care of it mean? What is civic duty? How do we imagine that in this current hyper-mediated world? You know, these are all of the things that I want to bind together with my pro-nuclear advocacy. And it seems like quite a task. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but if you want to watch me try, it's free.
Emmett, I got one last question for you. Are you going to grow a nuclear advocacy mustache?
I actually, you know, I was thinking about it. The problem is that the only type of mustache I really look good in is a handlebar. And I look a little bit too much, like people can't really see me, but I have like tattoos on like my hands and stuff. I look a little bit too much like an ex-con when I do one of those, right? Like I understand that my job here isn't to be like respectable, you know, and like the sort of white collar NGO way, but I would like to not look totally beyond the pale. So
fair enough.
I'm probably going to keep it just a little scruffy, you know?
All right. Emmet, man, thanks for making the time. It's a pleasure having you on, working on camera and off camera with you as an ally. Looking forward to more of this, man, and catching future episodes.
Yeah, I'm excited to get canceled for some of the things I said on air today.